In a quiet village where traditions run deep and secrets are buried even deeper, Amina thought she had found happiness in her marriage to Farouk. But stepping into his family's compound, she quickly discovers that acceptance is not easily won. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you find it compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe. Amina stood at the entrance of her new home, her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The sun cast a warm golden hue over the sprawling family compound, where vibrant flowers lined the pathways and the scent of freshly baked bread lingered in the air. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was the start of a new chapter in her life. As Farouk's new wife, she had finally found the love she had always dreamed of. Now, she was determined to prove herself worthy of his family's acceptance. Farouk's gentle touch on her shoulder drew her back from her thoughts. "Are you ready?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with that reassuring warmth she had come to love. She nodded, squeezing his hand. Together, they stepped forward into the courtyard where his family had gathered to greet them. Among the relatives and neighbors offering polite smiles and welcoming gestures stood Zainab, Farouk's mother. The older woman's face was a mask of stern disapproval, her eyes cold as they scanned Amina from head to toe. Amina's smile faltered under that piercing gaze, but she quickly composed herself, bowing her head respectfully. "Welcome, Amina," Zainab said, her tone as chilly as the breeze that swept through the courtyard. "I trust you know your place here." "Yes, Mama," Amina replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. She was determined not to let Zainab's hostility rattle her. She had heard stories about her mother-in-law's sharp tongue, but Farouk had assured her it would pass with time. All she had to do was prove that she was a good wife, dedicated and capable. As the afternoon wore on, Amina busied herself with helping in the kitchen, hoping to win Zainab's favor by showing her willingness to contribute. But every attempt seemed to draw more criticism. When Amina offered to prepare a traditional stew, Zainab sniffed disdainfully. "You think you can cook for this family?" she scoffed. "I doubt your mother ever taught you properly. If the food turns out badly, you will answer for it." Amina swallowed hard and nodded, hiding her trembling hands as she set about her task. She could feel the weight of Zainab's eyes on her back, watching her every move. The other women in the kitchen whispered among themselves, casting sympathetic glances her way. Yet, none dared to cross Zainab. As evening fell, the family gathered for dinner. Amina nervously served the meal she had painstakingly prepared. The room was filled with the sound of clinking dishes and quiet conversation, but all Amina could focus on was Zainab's reaction. The older woman took a single bite, then set her spoon down with a loud clatter. "It's passable," Zainab said, her voice laced with reluctant approval. "But don't get too comfortable, girl. A single meal doesn't prove anything." Amina forced a smile and nodded, but inside, her heart sank. She had hoped for at least a small sign of acceptance. Instead, Zainab's coldness only seemed to deepen. Farouk, sensing her discomfort, reached under the table to squeeze her hand. It was a small gesture, but it gave Amina the strength to hold her head high. Later that night, as Amina prepared for bed in the modest room she now shared with Farouk, she couldn't shake the feeling that Zainab's hostility was only the beginning. She had expected some resistance, but not the open disdain she had witnessed today. Farouk came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Don't let her get to you, Amina," he murmured. "My mother is difficult, but she will come around. Just give her time." "I will," Amina whispered, though doubt gnawed at her. "I just want her to see that I'm not here to take anything away. I only want to be part of this family." Farouk kissed her forehead softly. "I know. And she will, eventually. But you have to be patient." As Amina lay in bed that night, listening to the soft rustle of leaves outside their window, she tried to convince herself that Farouk was right. But her mind kept returning to the moment she had overheard Zainab's conversation with a neighbor earlier that day. "She's not fit for my son," Zainab had hissed, her voice carrying through the courtyard. "I'll make sure she doesn't last a month here." A chill ran down Amina's spine as the words echoed in her mind. What had she gotten herself into? She had expected challenges, but she hadn't anticipated outright hostility. As the darkness settled around her, Amina resolved to stay strong. She wouldn't let Zainab's venomous words break her spirit. She would fight for her place in this family, no matter what it took. For now, however, she would have to tread carefully. Zainab was watching, waiting for her to stumble. And Amina knew she couldn't afford to make a single misstep. The morning sun bathed the compound in a soft, golden light, but for Amina, it felt like the beginning of another trial. She rose early, determined to prove her worth to Zainab and the rest of the family. Today, she would assist in preparing the household for the upcoming family gathering, a significant event where neighbors and relatives would join to celebrate Farouk's recent marriage. It was her chance to show everyone she belonged here. As she stepped into the courtyard, Amina found Zainab already directing the servants with an air of authority. The older woman's sharp eyes flicked to Amina, her lips thinning into a disapproving line. "You're up early," Zainab remarked, her tone implying that Amina had already done something wrong. "I suppose you want to make yourself useful. Well, let's see if you're capable." Amina nodded eagerly, despite the knot tightening in her stomach. "Yes, Mama. Just tell me what needs to be done." Zainab waved her hand dismissively. "Go to the market and get the freshest ingredients for today's feast. But mind you, we need everything to be perfect. Don't come back with anything less than the best, or you'll regret it." The words were laced with a subtle threat, but Amina simply bowed her head and set off toward the bustling village market. She had grown up in a small, quiet town, and the chaos of the market overwhelmed her at first, the vendors shouting their prices, the colorful stalls packed with goods, and the constant jostling of the crowd. Determined to complete her task without error, Amina carefully selected the freshest vegetables, spices, and meat, her eyes constantly flicking over the items to ensure their quality. But even as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on her. Turning her head, she caught sight of one of Zainab's friends watching her from a distance, whispering to another woman. It seemed Zainab had sent spies to report on her progress. By the time she returned to the compound, the sun was high in the sky, and Zainab was waiting for her at the entrance with crossed arms. The older woman inspected the purchases with an exaggerated slowness, lifting each vegetable, sniffing the spices, and making disapproving noises. "I suppose this will have to do," Zainab finally said, her voice dripping with reluctance. "Now, go and help in the kitchen. But remember, I'll be watching." Amina wasted no time in joining the other women who were busy preparing the meal. She worked quickly, her hands moving with practiced skill as she chopped, mixed, and cooked under the scrutinizing gaze of her mother-in-law. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but she pressed on, refusing to give Zainab the satisfaction of seeing her falter. The heat in the kitchen was stifling, and the tension was palpable. Every now and then, one of the women would give Amina a sympathetic glance, but no one dared to openly support her. Zainab was like a hawk, swooping in to criticize every move Amina made. "You call this a proper cut?" Zainab sneered, snatching a knife from Amina's hand. "It's a wonder Farouk even eats your cooking." Amina bit her tongue, swallowing the retort that threatened to escape. Instead, she focused on finishing her tasks, praying silently that the feast would turn out well. This gathering was her chance to show Zainab that she was more than capable of being a good wife to Farouk. As the family and guests began to gather in the courtyard, Amina helped serve the dishes, her hands trembling slightly. She watched anxiously as the guests took their first bites, waiting for any sign of approval or, worse, criticism. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of utensils clinking against plates. Then, to her surprise, an elder among the guests turned to Zainab and said, "The food is quite delicious today, Zainab. Your daughter-in-law must have a magic touch." Amina's heart leapt with joy, but the moment was short-lived. Zainab's face tightened, her eyes narrowing. "I suppose even a broken pot can hold water sometimes," she replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Amina's moment of triumph turned to ashes. Feeling the sting of humiliation, Amina quickly retreated to the kitchen to hide her tears. She had worked so hard, only for Zainab to turn her small victory into yet another humiliation. As she leaned against the cool stone wall, she reminded herself of Farouk's words. She needed to be patient, to persevere, no matter how difficult Zainab made it for her. But as she wiped her tears, a servant rushed into the kitchen, her eyes wide with panic. "Amina, Zainab is calling for you. She's furious about something." Amina's heart sank. What now? Steeling herself, she walked back to the courtyard, where Zainab was standing with a shattered pot at her feet. "What is the meaning of this?" Zainab demanded, holding up a broken piece of ceramic. "This was our family's heirloom, and now it's ruined. I found it in the trash after you were cleaning up. How careless can you be?" Amina's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't touched the pot, she knew nothing about it. But the accusing glares from the family and the guests told her that no one would believe her protests of innocence. Zainab's eyes glinted with triumph. "You think you can waltz into my family and destroy everything we hold dear? You've proven yourself unworthy." Amina stood frozen, feeling the walls close in around her. She realized now that Zainab was not just cold or harsh, she was determined to destroy Amina's place in the family, no matter the cost. And if Amina didn't find a way to turn things around soon, she feared she would lose Farouk's support as well. As the guests dispersed and the evening shadows lengthened, Amina knew she had to steel herself for whatever trials Zainab had planned next. But one thing was clear, Zainab would not rest until Amina was driven out, and Amina had to find a way to survive if she was to keep her marriage and her place in this family. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale light over the village, but Amina was already awake. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a relentless drumbeat. Zainab's accusations, the accusing stares from the guests, and Farouk's silence had left her shaken. Amina knew she had to act quickly if she wanted to salvage her place in this family. She couldn't afford to let Zainab's schemes destroy her marriage. Determined, she set about her morning chores, her mind racing with thoughts of how to prove her innocence. As she swept the courtyard, a faint sound caught her attention. Turning, she saw Miriam, the family's trusted servant, lingering at the edge of the compound. The older woman gave Amina a furtive look and then beckoned her over with a quick wave of her hand. "What is it, Miriam?" Amina asked quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Zainab's spies seemed to be everywhere, always ready to pounce on the slightest mistake. Miriam leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should be careful, Amina. Mistress Zainab has been spreading rumors about you. She's trying to turn everyone against you." Amina's stomach tightened. "I've suspected as much. But why? What did I ever do to her?" Miriam hesitated, glancing around nervously. "It's not just that she dislikes you," she said. "She's planning something. I overheard her talking to one of her friends about making sure Farouk takes the job in the city. She wants him away from here and away from you." Amina's heart sank. So Zainab was behind the mysterious job offer Farouk had received. She had been trying to drive a wedge between them, hoping that if Farouk left, Amina would be isolated and easier to manipulate or even abandon. "Thank you for telling me, Miriam," Amina said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I'll be careful." Miriam nodded, but gave Amina a look filled with pity. "Be careful, child. Mistress Zainab is not one to be underestimated." As Miriam slipped away, Amina's mind raced. She needed proof of Zainab's schemes to convince Farouk before it was too late. But how could she expose her mother-in-law without making things worse? That evening, as Farouk prepared to meet with the elders to discuss the job offer, Amina decided it was time to confront him. She found him in their room, adjusting his robe in front of a dusty old mirror. "Farouk, we need to talk," Amina said, her voice steady despite the nervous fluttering in her chest. He turned to her, his expression gentle but weary. "Amina, if this is about my mother—" "It's not just about your mother," she interrupted, stepping closer. "I've learned something important, and I need you to listen. That job offer you received, it's not a coincidence. Your mother is behind it. She wants you to leave so she can get rid of me." Farouk's brows furrowed, and for a moment, Amina saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced with resignation. "Amina, you're letting your imagination get the best of you. My mother may be harsh, but she wouldn't go that far." "She would," Amina insisted. "And she has." Miriam overheard her talking about it. "Farouk, she's trying to destroy our marriage." Farouk sighed heavily and rubbed his temples. "This is exactly why I've been considering the job, Amina. The tension between you and my mother, it's tearing me apart. I just need some time away to think." Amina's heart sank. She could see that Farouk was torn, but his desire to escape was exactly what Zainab wanted. And if he left, Amina would have no one to defend her against her mother-in-law's cruelty. Before she could say anything more, a commotion erupted in the courtyard. Voices were raised, and she heard Zainab's familiar tone, sharp and commanding. "Amina, come here at once." Amina exchanged a worried glance with Farouk before hurrying outside. The sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. Zainab stood in the middle of the courtyard, holding a small wooden box in her hands. The crowd of curious onlookers parted as Amina approached. "What is this?" Zainab demanded, thrusting the box toward Amina. "I found it hidden under your bed. Care to explain?" Amina's eyes widened in shock. She had never seen the box before, but the moment Zainab opened it, revealing a collection of expensive jewelry and coins, the gasps from the onlookers confirmed her worst fears. I don't know how that got there," Amina stammered, her mind racing. This had to be another one of Zainab's traps. But how could she prove it? Zainab's eyes gleamed with triumph. "You expect us to believe that? You've been stealing from us all along. This is proof of what kind of woman you truly are." The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, and Amina could feel the walls closing in on her. She turned desperately to Farouk, who had just arrived on the scene. His face was a mask of confusion and disbelief. "Farouk, you have to believe me," Amina pleaded. "I didn't do this." But before Farouk could respond, Miriam stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Mistress Zainab, I saw you take that box from your own room and place it under Amina's bed." A stunned silence fell over the courtyard. Zainab's face went white with fury. "You dare lie to protect this thief?" she hissed. Miriam held her ground. "I have no reason to lie. I saw you with my own eyes." Farouk turned to his mother, his expression darkening. "Is this true, Mother? Did you set this up?" For the first time, Zainab seemed to falter. Her eyes darted around, searching for support, but the crowd had turned against her. The whispers of disapproval were growing louder. She straightened her back, her face hardening once more. "I did what I had to do to protect our family, Farouk. This woman will ruin us." Farouk's gaze shifted to Amina, and she could see the torment in his eyes. But before he could say anything, Zainab turned on her heel and stormed back into the house, leaving the courtyard in stunned silence. As the crowd dispersed, Farouk took Amina's hand. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said quietly. "But I need time to think." Amina nodded, tears stinging her eyes. She had won a small victory, but she knew the battle was far from over. Zainab would not give up so easily, and with Farouk's faith wavering, Amina's place in the family was still on shaky ground. The compound was eerily quiet that evening, a heavy tension hanging in the air after Zainab's failed attempt to frame Amina. Though Miriam's testimony had exposed the truth, the damage was done. Farouk remained distant, his eyes clouded with doubt and confusion. The trust between husband and wife had been shaken, and Amina felt as if she were walking on a razor's edge. Determined not to be defeated, Amina retreated to the small, dimly lit storeroom where Zainab kept old family relics. If there was any hope of proving herself and rebuilding her life with Farouk, she needed to uncover the reason behind Zainab's relentless hatred. There had to be something hidden in the shadows of this family's past, something that would explain Zainab's bitterness. The room smelled of dust and old wood. Amina's fingers traced over the shelves, brushing past faded photographs, brittle letters, and time-worn trinkets. At the very back, Half buried under a stack of old clothes, she discovered a small, leather-bound journal. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. With a cautious glance toward the door, Amina opened the journal. The pages were filled with Zainab's neat handwriting, detailing the life of a proud woman who had once been filled with hope. As Amina read on, her breath caught in her throat. The entries revealed a story she had never expected. Years ago, Zainab had another daughter-in-law, a young woman named Sophia. She had been beautiful, intelligent, and well-loved by the family, until she betrayed them. According to the journal, Sophia had stolen from the family, using her newfound wealth to run away, leaving Farouk's older brother disgraced and brokenhearted. The scandal had nearly destroyed the family's reputation, and Zainab had vowed never to let another outsider ruin them again. Amina's heart sank as she realized the depth of Zainab's pain. The older woman's cruelty wasn't just born of spite, it was fueled by a deep-seated fear of betrayal. In her twisted way, Zainab believed that by driving Amina away, she was protecting her family from another devastating loss. Before Amina could process what she had learned, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. She quickly shoved the journal back into its hiding place, just as the door creaked open to reveal Zainab, her eyes gleaming with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" Zainab demanded, her voice as sharp as a knife. I was looking for something to help with the dinner preparations," Amina lied, her heart pounding. She couldn't let Zainab know that she had discovered her secrets. "Not yet." Zainab's gaze swept over the room, lingering on the disheveled shelf. But she said nothing, only narrowing her eyes at Amina before turning to leave. As the door closed behind her, Amina released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That night, as the family gathered for another tense meal, Amina struggled to hide her new knowledge. She had glimpsed the heart of Zainab's darkness, but she also knew that exposing the past would only push Farouk further away. If she wanted to mend the rift between them, she needed to find a way to heal the wounds that still festered in Zainab's heart. However, Zainab was not ready to relent. In a desperate attempt to regain control, she devised one final plan. As the family finished their meal, Zainab announced that they would host a special feast the following night in honor of Farouk's impending departure. Her voice was sweet and cheerful, but Amina could sense the malice lurking beneath. As Amina helped clear the dishes, Zainab pulled her aside, her grip on Amina's arm like a vice. "Tomorrow will be your last chance to prove yourself," she whispered. "If you fail, you'll have no place in this family." Amina's stomach twisted with dread. She knew that Zainab was setting a trap, one that could shatter her relationship with Farouk once and for all. But this time, she was prepared. She now understood Zainab's fears and the source of her bitterness. If she could turn that knowledge to her advantage, perhaps she could finally find a way to end this war. As the evening drew to a close, Farouk approached Amina, his eyes filled with exhaustion. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Amina forced a smile, her resolve hardening. "I will be," she replied. "But Farouk, we need to talk, after the feast tomorrow. There's something important you need to know." Farouk nodded, though there was doubt in his eyes. "I hope whatever it is will help me understand all this," he said softly. "It will," Amina promised, hoping she was right. She had one night left to change everything, to bridge the chasm between herself and Farouk, and to finally end Zainab's campaign against her. As she lay in bed that night, Amina stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with plans. The ticking clock was counting down. Tomorrow, it would be all or nothing. She had to confront Zainab's fears head-on, before the final pieces of her fragile world came crashing down. The compound was alive with activity as the preparations for the feast got underway. Amina moved through the bustling courtyard, her mind a swirl of anxious thoughts. Today would be the decisive moment. Either she would finally earn her place in this family, or Zainab's schemes would succeed in driving her away. With Farouk on the verge of leaving for the city, this was her last chance to reveal the truth and heal the rift between them. The sun had barely begun to set when the guests started to arrive. Amina greeted them with a polite smile, but her heart was pounding. Zainab was watching her like a hawk, her cold gaze following Amina's every move. The older woman had made it clear, any mistake tonight would be Amina's final undoing. As the feast began, Amina did her best to stay focused. She moved gracefully between the tables, serving the dishes she had prepared with great care. The guests complimented her cooking, and for a brief moment, Amina allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. But Zainab's scowl from across the courtyard was a constant reminder that this battle was far from over. Just as the meal was winding down, Zainab stood up, clapping her hands to draw everyone's attention. "I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge my son Farouk, who has been offered a prestigious job in the city," she announced, her voice smooth, but with an edge that made Amina's stomach churn. "We're so proud of him, and I'm sure he will make the right decision for his future." Amina's heart sank as she saw Farouk's conflicted expression. She knew that Zainab was trying to pressure him into leaving, hoping that with Farouk gone, Amina would have no choice but to leave the family. But Amina wasn't going to let that happen. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Before we continue the celebration, I'd like to share something I recently discovered," she said, meeting Farouk's eyes. "There are things you need to know about your family's past, and I believe it will change everything." The crowd fell silent, curious whispers rippling through the guests. Zainab's face went pale, her eyes narrowing into slits. "What nonsense are you spouting now?" she hissed, but Amina pressed on. "I found an old journal," Amina continued, her voice unwavering. "It belonged to Zainab, and it reveals a story from many years ago about another daughter-in-law, Sophia. She betrayed this family, and ever since then, Zainab has been living in fear of it happening again. That fear is what's driven her actions against me." Gasps filled the courtyard as the guests turned to Zainab, who was now shaking with fury. "How dare you invade my privacy?" Zainab spat, her voice a low growl. "You have no right to dig into my past." "I only did it to understand why you've been trying so hard to ruin my marriage," Amina replied, her voice softening. "I understand now, Mama. You were hurt deeply, and you've been trying to protect your family the only way you know how. But I am not Sophia, and I would never betray Farouk or this family." The tension in the air was almost palpable as Zainab's mask of anger cracked, revealing a glimmer of pain beneath. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the silence. "Mama, is this true?" Farouk asked, stepping forward, his face stricken with disbelief. "Have you been trying to break my marriage apart because of something that happened years ago?" For a moment, Zainab looked as though she might deny it. But then, with a defeated sigh, she lowered her gaze. "I only wanted to protect you," she muttered. "I couldn't let history repeat itself." The courtyard erupted in hushed conversations as the guests processed this revelation. Amina took a step closer to Zainab, her voice gentle. "I understand your fear, Mama. But pushing me away won't protect Farouk. It will only hurt him. I'm not your enemy. I only want to be part of this family." Zainab's shoulders sagged, the fight finally draining from her eyes. The guests watched in stunned silence as the proud woman, who had ruled her household with an iron fist, seemed to crumble before their eyes. After a long, tense pause, Zainab turned to Farouk, her voice barely a whisper. I was wrong. I let my fear control me." Farouk took a deep breath, his face a mixture of relief and sadness. "All I've ever wanted was for you to accept Amina," he said quietly. "We can't keep living like this, Mama." With tears glistening in her eyes, Zainab nodded slowly. "I see that now," she admitted. Turning to Amina, she hesitated before speaking. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you, but for the sake of my son, I'm willing to try." Amina's eyes welled with tears. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. She stepped forward and took Zainab's hand in hers. "That's all I've ever wanted," she said softly. "A chance to be part of this family." The guests erupted in applause, and for the first time, Amina felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Farouk pulled her into a tight embrace, whispering in her ear, "Thank you for not giving up on us." As the feast resumed, the tension that had plagued the family for so long seemed to dissipate. The air was lighter, the laughter more genuine, and for the first time, Amina felt like she truly belonged. But as the moon rose high above the village, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that this fragile peace would require careful nurturing. She had won the first battle, but the journey to healing Zainab's heart would be a long one. Still, with Farouk by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next.